We're going to begin our budget workshop, so I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Paluski.
Yes, ma'am. Madam President, members of our Board of Education, this is our first budget workshop for this school year. And as we've promised, one of the things that we were working towards as a goal was a budget workbook or for our public and for our community. And I applaud Mr. Brown's going to walk us through kind of a high level, but I applaud him and his team of our first kind of work through, but I think to give you and the public an idea on what we're projected, kind of some trends, as well as our projected budget that we will present to you, which by law has to be done by the end of September, I believe. And Mr. Brown's going to go through all of that. So with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Dr. Paluski. All right, so you've got 3 documents in front of you. We'll just identify those so we can walk through them. The first one is the budget book, has the cover that's labeled budget book. And then the other 2 documents, one is labeled proposed expenditures and one is labeled proposed revenues at the top. So we'll be referring to these 2 a little bit later. So we'll be going through the budget book first. So just to walk you through the book, first of all, I want to commend my staff, Ms. Edwards. She's been working with me on budget and closing the fiscal year 22. And I'll say this is the first year that we have presented the budget this early. And it's been a bit of a challenge to do that because we still have fiscal year 22 still open. So our budget is not yet live in this year because the state allows us to publish that in the window of September 15th to September 30th. So we're doing this a bit early, but I think this is good. It gives you all time to digest what we talk about. You're not having to approve that in the same sitting tonight. So our plan is to go through this information tonight, and then at Thursday night's meeting, it'll just be an information question and answer session. Of course, we'll take questions and answer them tonight as well. But as you go through the book and as you digest it, if you have additional questions, we'll take those on Thursday night. We'll again take, the plan is to take questions at the regular September meeting. And then we'll decide, I guess, after Thursday night whether we can do a formal approval at the regular meeting in September, or if a special meeting will be required if you have additional questions beyond that. So,
And Mr. Brown, can you let them know about your staff is going to take notes on their questions and answers?
That's correct.
To give back to them?
That's correct. So Ms. Edwards is here to assist me in doing the presentation and helping me answer questions here in the room. But in our conference room, I do have 2 members that are staying tonight, 2 members of my team, Ms. Fowler and Ms. Estes. They're going to be recording your questions that you have about the budget and answers that we give, or if we have to look up the answers for those questions, we're going to compile a question and answer document that we'll release, and then we'll update that as additional questions are answered, asked and answered. So we'll make those available to you, okay? All right, so again, the purpose of this budget book is to be a document that you can reference and the public can reference to answer some of the high-level questions that may be of interest to the public and to you as board members when you're out talking to members. You know, they may ask you how much of the budget is from federal funds, or how much of the budget is from state and local. And those sort of high-level questions are answered here and summarized for you to have that kind of information. What % of our budget is related to salary and benefits? you would be able to answer that question as well from here. So the purpose is just to give you this guide that will help you navigate some of those questions about the budget. I've got a section in here devoted to you, the board members, and this is more for the public than for you all. I just put this in here because one of your major responsibilities as a board is to approve a budget process and to actually approve the budget. So I snipped this from the Arkansas School Boards Association website that had those that type of information about board members. And then, of course, I've got your information. I did not put your contact information in there, but and I've got information about which zone and the expiration dates of your zone. So all that's a part of our board book. If you'll, also in there is Dr. Paluski's information as superintendent. Again, more for public reference than anything. And then on the page 7 of the budget book, you'll see the organizational chart for the finance office. And I'll point out that we do have 11 employees. Miss Edwards and I are there on top, and then we have 7 financial specialists. Each one has their own area of expertise. So Ms. Fowler is mostly revenue and bank. She's listed there first. Ms. Jackson is mostly accounts payable, but you'll see there, I've listed their responsibilities. And their responsibility is not limited to one thing. They have a whole host of responsibilities. Ms. Danette Lawson is mostly benefits reconciliation associated with payroll. Ms. Jackson and Mr. Williams are mostly tied to payroll. And Ms. Estes is mostly tied to purchasing and budgeting, and Ms. Carroll is mostly tied to the Federal Programs Office. So she's Ms. Ratliff's financial specialist assigned from my office to her. Additionally, Kathy Hale, our e-school administrator, SIS coordinator, and Ms. Rubel, her assistant, are both members of my department as well. So we've got that organizational chart for you there. I've got some, you'll hear me discuss some things like ADM, ALE, ESA, ESSER, categorical funding. And what I've done is taken those keywords that you may or may not be familiar with on a regular basis or work with on a regular basis, and I've given you just a short and sweet definition of what it means. So those next 3 pages there are, it ended up being 5, didn't it? 5 pages are definitions as it relates to those terms that are associated with the budget and funding and okay. On page 13, I've outlined some best financial practices. This is the structure that we strive to use in our business office, and we do have established procedures where we monitor our banks daily. We monitor our purchasing process daily. We have travel reimbursement processes in place. So all of those best practices that are outlined for finance departments are here, and I've placed them in our book for your reference and for the public reference as well. On page 14, that begins our district budget process. And I just wanted to walk you through this because it's not something that happens just in the month of August or September. This is something that actually starts, we're about to start the process for the ensuing year. So in July and August, we receive our preliminary state aid notice. I've got that in this booklet, and we'll go over what that means. We receive it from DESE. DESE is one of those acronyms. It changed from ADE to DESE, so that stands for Arkansas Division of Elementary and Secondary Education. We're also working on, in July, we're working on Cycle 8, and in August, we're working on Cycle 9. So we're doing that final close, and you hear me talk about cycles. Cycle 1, Cycle 9, Cycle 8, all of those are reporting periods where we have to report information through eFinance and eSchool to ADE on a regular basis, and they have defined that window of time. I've got that process in here too that we'll look at as well. In September, we start the meet process with principals and getting their curriculum needs, their staffing wishes. In October, they work with the Federal Programs Office. They also review ADM. And in November, principals work and prepare school needs and data presentations for the executive team. And that's something new that Dr. Paluski brought with him. And the principals have been presenting data to us. They present their school snapshot, their school achievement data, their staffing data, and then they present their wish list, their needs, their wants. That begins in November. In January, you all approve the ensuing year's calendar, and Mr. Smith usually brings that to you, and that is a part of our budgeting process, because we have to have, our key to opening next year's budget is to set that calendar that you all approve. That also allows us to work on contracts for employees the next year. So that's why we bring it to you so early in January, so that can get approved and it can be input into eFinance, and those windows can be opened for us. And you can see there in March, campus administration works with human resources on staffing requirements. In April, budget meetings occur with directors, coordinators, and department heads. That's in my office. So we're meeting with them in April and May. And then in May, we're issuing contracts to employees for the ensuing year, for the following year. So all of that, so when we issue contracts to an employee, that actually sets up our salary and benefits budget for the next year. That's actually done in personnel budgeting. And then in June, we're developing preliminary federal budgets for the next year, and we're also closing out our current year. So that's sort of the big picture on the budget process. I mentioned to you that we had the data reporting schedule. It's actually in here. That's on page 15. And you'll see cycles 1 through 9 are listed there. And in cycle 1, you see the first thing listed there. That's budget is reported to ADE, and you'll see this window there, September 15th to September 30th. So we can't report it before then, and we can't report it after then. It has to be within that window. My office does cycle 1 and cycle 8 and cycle 9. Those three are the financial cycles. Cycles 2 through 7 are done by Kathy Hale and my office jointly, but she mostly has the lead on those. And you can see the information that is collected by ADE in each of those cycles. So I guess let's just kind of pause there. Do you have any questions about the budget process or the data reporting schedule that we've discussed, or anything that we've talked about to this point? Everyone good?
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
In that finance audit that we had, report was suggesting that we move everything back and have a budget prior to October 1. And I didn't know, are we going to try to do that, or is that possible, or are we talking about that, or are we gonna just stay this way, or do we know?
Well, there are certain things that can happen a little earlier, like we're preparing the budget, we're presenting it to you earlier. We are, allowing that question, that digestion period where you all can, review it, ask questions. However, the actual window for us to report it to ADE and to get everything live in our system is September the 15th to September the 30th, and that's an Arkansas thing. And I'll say, there are processes we can do earlier, but there's also processes that are defined by ADE where we have to work within that. So we do have a budget. It is in what we call budget prep right now. It's not over in live, so the buildings don't see it on their, when they pull up their e-finance and they go to purchase orders and they try to make a purchase order or they try to run their budget, they won't see it because it's not in live. We do have a budget. It's in budget prep. It's in a separate module, and that's sort of our work area where we prepare the budget. And then when we go to move that from budget prep to live, that's a process where we're posting the budget, and that usually happens within this September 15th to September 30th window. So we do have a budget. It's not out there in live where everybody can see it. It's actually in our workspace until the window when we can publish that to ADE.
When can buildings process a purchase order?
They can do that starting immediately in July. So the way eFinance works and the way we operate it, you can have eFinance either lock down a budget, meaning you can't use it unless you have sufficient budget, or you can have it what's unlocked, and that allows them to make purchase orders whether or not they have money in the budget or not. That's two ways to operate eFinance. From July until the time we post budgets, we have it unlocked. So they can go in, and if they need to order supplies for school, they need to get computers or, laptops or anything of that nature, they can process a purchase order and do that order beginning when we open in July. It's usually right after July the 4th when we open our books. So there's nothing in our procedures that prevents them from proceeding on and operating their school and being able to purchase things and pay for things. Just when we post budget and we drop their budget in, then we lock it down and we say, now you have to have money in your budget to process your purchase orders. So they've got to make sure they have their money where they want it. If they don't, they just email us, we move it for them. And then, so after we post budget to ADE, it becomes locked down and they have to operate within the budgets that they've defined at that point.
So what kind of timeline is that? So like, let's say in July, the principals are doing purchase orders. And then when does the lockdown come that, or tell them,
It's a little bit of
does it
September, between September 15th and September 30th.
so that's when the money gets put into the accounts?
That's when they can see their budget amount in their accounts.
So
Yes.
then really the purchase orders aren't done until October?
No, they're done in July. You can process a purchase order without money showing up in your budget. You have that ability if it's unlocked.
Okay.
So until the budget is posted, we unlock it for the buildings so they can process and do what they need to do. We post budget, lock it down, then they have to work within the limits of their budget. So,
Is the budget about the same each year? So I've got a pretty good idea if I have like $500 to spend.
oh, well, see, every principal does their own budget prep with us, and they have their own printout, so they know what their budget is already.
Okay, so in
Okay.
July, I know what I'm spending, I know
Yes.
what I need, I'm
Yeah.
putting it in.
Yeah.
Does that help?
Okay, that makes sense now.
They already have their budget, they know what amount will be published in their accounts. It's
So I'm
just,
not
it
just
doesn't
writing
show
checks.
up until we can release it to ADP.
You're not writing
and put
blank
it
checks.
live.
Correct.
That's why I was trying to, that helped
need a new
answer my
purse.
question, because my thing was, if they don't see the budget until September, how can you make a purchase? Because
Start
what
school.
if you go
Yeah.
over?
Sure,
So they automatically, they know before they
Yes.
make the purchase.
yes, they have, we actually, work with them, that's actually in their presentation that they make to the executive team, is
Okay.
how they're gonna structure their operational dollars.
Okay.
They actually determine their budget, and they have their budget well in advance before July 1 ever gets there.
Makes sense.
And they know where their money is and where they can spend the money. But if they don't, let's say that they go over, let's say they had $500 in tablet computers and they buy 1,000. When we post their budget and close it down, it'll just show a negative $500 on that line. They would just move money from another line to zero that up. So
Within category.
they're not locked in to the budget that they had initially established, but once we post it, they have to operate within that or ask for an adjustment to it. And they just send us an email and say, hey, move $1,000 from general supplies to travel so I can pay for a group of teachers to go to a training. We do that.
Mr. Brown, well, on that question, my understanding is that in finance, you don't borrow from Peter to pay Paul, and if it hasn't been budgeted, they have just overspent. You know what I mean? These are things that have happened previously in years past. So if they overspend, because I keep hearing you saying, we can go over there and get some money out of there. But to me, if it's budgeted for something else, why would you rob Peter to pay Paul when Paul still got some money over here? That's the clarity I need.
Sure. So the way that works, the principals do their very best to give us what, the lines in the budget. So a principal's budget may have 20 or 30 lines in it. And they may say, I plan to spend money on these 10 of my 30 lines. But let's say that someone breaks, like a printer breaks, and they weren't planning for it, but they need to replace it.
Okay.
They can come to one of those lines where they had money, and
Oh,
they say,
one
oh,
of their
well,
lines.
now my priority is a printer, and I'm not gonna buy a standing desk for
Okay,
myself.
I understand now. You're looking at this list of line items they have, and since you haven't used that money out of there, because
That's
otherwise,
correct.
that's what was confusing me.
That's correct.
And
So
thank you.
they can, within their lines of their budget, they can move it around as their priorities change throughout the year,
So within the category.
within the category, within their building
Right.
budget, they can move that around.
Well,
Yes,
that's
ma'am.
fine. That answers it, because otherwise it was
Yes, ma'am.
not.
Money
under-
man.
No.
Quick question, where it says school ID changes, is that just from kids maybe moving to a different school or what?
Which cycle are you?
Cycle one.
Cycle one, yeah.
Student ID changes.
It's in 1,
So-
4,
2,
5, it's kinda all over.
Yes, so there's a process on the way eSchool assigns an ID number to a student.
Mhm.
And sometimes when parents come in to register, they don't bring all their documentation in, or they may not bring a social security card in. And that's really required for us to get an appropriate ID from the state. So sometimes a student's ID will change, and you have to keep record of it in eSchool. As for whatever reason their ID changes, you have to make record of what it was previously. So all of those changes are recorded with ADE. They keep up with each student by social security number to make sure that North Little Rock does not draw money from Miss Person West, who may be also on the roll over at Pulaski County Special School District.
Gotcha, okay.
They check that, and so they require us to log social security number changes and student ID changes.
So it's just better,
in these
it's like
things.
self-checking each cycle?
That's correct.
Okay, gotcha.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Oh, I'm not doing it. You can if you want.
Page 16.
And I think this is a second monitor, so you've got to get it up there on that one.
Maybe Mr. Nanning could help us out.
Brian, to follow up on the student ID changes, would that be something, if I was enrolled here in North Little Rock and I live with mom and dad, but then an emergency situation happened and now I'm a foster child, does that change the student ID?
If you were enrolled in North Little Rock and became foster and stayed in North Little Rock, it would not.
Okay,
But if you move districts, and let's say that sometimes that happens,
Yeah,
where
it
a
does.
foster child wouldn't have access to birth certificates or social security
Right.
cards, the goal of school districts are to get them in school.
yep,
So you use temporary numbers, temporary social security numbers, and then when you get all the paperwork, you can come back and say, now I'm changing the social, but you go over here and you log what the old one
Which,
was,
yeah.
what the new one is, and then the state pulls that record to, you know,
Gotcha.
keep those changes,
Match it
just so
all.
that they can verify. And, yes, yes, that's a good, example of how that would change. Okay, so if there are no other questions, let's move on to page 16. And I wanted to walk you through our projected legal balance for the close of FY '22. So that's last year's budget. We'll be closing that tomorrow with ADE. And I wanted to sort of walk you through this. So the top part, the top section of this worksheet is revenue related, and the bottom part is expenditure related. And what we do is we populate this, and then on a monthly basis, we populate it in the beginning with projections, and then we populate it with actuals after the month is complete. And we keep up with how we're faring on what we were projecting. And I wanted to walk you through that the fiscal year end close is projected to be, our balance, our net legal balance, projected to be $27.8 million. And what we normally do, if you remember, we keep $12.8 million as our net legal, and we transfer the balance of that over to the building fund. Okay? So we're anticipating transferring around 15 million over to the building fund. And that is a larger than usual amount that we normally transfer. We normally transfer 1.5 to 2.5 million every year over to the building fund. But I've itemized out, so there at the bottom, if you look on the bottom, I've itemized out what the 15 million is, okay? So the 9.259 million, there, the first line says bond refinance. So that was the refinance of the $176 million bond, and it was also the refinance of the $20 million bond. We refinanced both bonds, and we've structured it so that we are paying only the interest for the first 3 years. That's the way Scott Beardsley had set that up. So we're actually saving money that we are moving over to the building fund for the first 3 years of our refinance savings. So this year, the fiscal year 22 bond refinance savings was $9.2 million. That's set aside, but that's in the $15 million transfer that we're gonna do. Additionally, you'll notice there, the second line, 1.129 million, ESSER ARP loss of revenue. This year, in fiscal year last year, we qualified for declining enrollment funding. That amount that we qualified for was $1.6 million. ESSER ARP funding, the U.S. Department of Education allowed schools who had a loss of revenue from declining enrollment, which we suffered from, allowed us to take ARP ESSER funds in the amount that equals our declining enrollment funding. So we were allowed to take 1.6 million in loss of revenue. What we're taking this year is 1.1 million, so that 1.129 is ESSER ARP loss of revenue funding. So we're taking that, we'll take the balance, roughly $550,000 that's left to take on that. We'll take it in fiscal year 23. So that'll be another item another savings opportunity for us to offset loss of revenue. We couldn't take it all in 1 year. I attempted to. I attempted to take it all in 1 year. But we have to meet what's called maintenance of equity for ARP ESSER. And what that means, maintenance of equity means that they look, how much are you spending of your state and local funds? How much did you spend in fiscal year 21? How much did you spend in fiscal year 22? And did you meet or exceed it in fiscal year 22? Well, we had loss of student enrollment, so we've had to absorb some staffing positions. We also had reduced revenue from the state because of our loss of students. So we were already very close on our maintenance of equity, and the maximum I could take and not have issues with meeting the maintenance of equity was 1.1 this year. So next year I'll take the balance. We have students increase. We have a number of students increasing. Our salary that's being paid out of state and local, it's increasing. We won't have trouble meeting it and taking it this next year. But I had to push pause. I couldn't get the whole amount this year. I tried.
So that's reoccurring every year.
Yes. No, just for 2 years. It's until you reach your 1.6 million.
Okay.
Okay. Also, the increase in tax revenue, the next line, 1.4 million. We actually received more money in taxes this year than we received last. And that's a combination of assessment going up and collection rates going up and delinquent bills being paid. So, if people don't pay their taxes on time, that affects our budget because it eventually gets transferred from the county to us, wired to us, and they wire to us what they get. And so during COVID, there was a decrease in tax revenue, and now people are recovering from that, and they're paying those delinquent taxes, and we've had an increase in assessment of taxes for last year, and we also have an increase in assessment for the fiscal year 23. And then you'll see the 1.5. That's operational savings. That's what we're used to transferring over to the building fund. So I wanted to detail this out. I didn't want you to see $15 million and go, why are you hoarding the money, Mr. Brown? That's not the case. It's all earmarked. There's a reason it's there. But this is there for you. So I guess let's just pause here. Do you have any questions about fiscal year 22 ending balance or any of the funds that we've talked about there that are being transferred to the building fund? Now, I'll come back to you. I will come back to you for authorization on moving that money to the building fund. I'll bring that back to you for you to approve, so you'll know the exact amount. It's just our projection at this point is the 15.07 million that we will,
With
that as
that-
soon as we close, I'll bring that to you.
Is that before or after the September 15th through the 30th report? So we won't see that until what, October?
No, I can actually bring it back to you, probably at our regular
Our next
September
regular
meeting.
meeting, okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Is this sheet, page 16, is this a report that you can spit out from e-school, or, I mean, e-finance, I guess it is? Or is this something that y'all created here?
It actually came with Miss Edwards, so I'm gonna, if you don't mind, I'll let you answer that question.
Okay, so I used to work for ADE, and this is a report that we used to use to review districts. And so I still have access to run those type of reports, and so I run this report for us monthly.
I love this.
Well, thank you.
I love it. Can we
Leadership.
see the report like this every month?
Sure.
Every board meeting? So I'd like to see what's our revenue coming in, the sources of all the different revenue, how it comes in over all the months, and also how the spending occurs. I love that, love it.
We can put that on a monthly basis in our board member report that goes out. That'd be-
That would be great. In the weekly board report, need to get it each week.
Yes. Well, it would,
Or I mean,
once a
we would
month.
do it
Once a month.
monthly.
Board
We do it
once a
monthly.
month.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So once a month, we could put it in
I
there.
have a question that I probably maybe should not ask now, but I'm gonna ask it anyway. Because when someone comes and says, okay, we need, $20,000 to buy these materials, and it's recommended that we do that, the board approves that to happen. I mean, should we have something like this in front of us that says, oh yeah, this particular purchase is coming from this fund, and we're showing that that much money is still left in the budget for that purchase?
I was just gonna say, which is one of the reasons why we do the yellow sheet. If you look at the yellow sheet, the second page usually talks about what funding source, is that coming from a grant fund? What is the dollar amount? But that's a good question, is then how much is left out of that? So you do have that front
Yes.
part. I'll let Mr. Brown take that.
I would say, so on the yellow sheet, that comes along with an action item, it does list the funding source, and it
Right.
normally lists the first 4 digits of the funding source. That's what we call the fund. If you also, on the, I just went blank, the consent agenda, the business office items that are listed there, there's also a funding source that lists the first 4 digits of the budget unit there. So if you take that and what we normally put in the board report, which is that, in the board agenda, which is called the
Reconciliation.
board report, it's a 14-page document that has the first 4 digits of every fund, and it has revenue, expenses, and a balance. So if you're interested to know if there's a $200,000 if there's a $200,000 purchase coming up, and you see that it's coming from Fund 2365, which would be ABC, you could go over to that board report and look for Fund 2365 and see, do they have the 200,000 in there? We check that for you. We won't bring anything to you that would result in them not having the money to do that. So I just I see that as our job. But if you're interested in pursuing that and looking at that you could crosswalk those first 4 numbers with the board report that's in your normal packet and look at the balance. Now, the only thing I would caution you there on is that in Fund 6, we have a lot of funds that are reimbursement funds. That means we have to spend it first, which the balance will be negative. So the district has to foot the bill on the front end. And then on a monthly basis, ADE does what they call a warehouse pull. They pull all of our federal expenditures, and then they send us the money afterwards. So the funds 1, 2, 4, 7 and 8 should all be positive balances. Fund 6, for the most part, will be negative because they're reimbursement. And they won't give us the federal money to sit in our bank account. We have to spend it, show we spent it by participating in the warehouse pool, and then they send us the money as a reimbursement on the back end. So the only way that wouldn't work what the process I described would be for Fund 6. And some of those accounts will be negative almost always because we have payroll going on, purchases, and they're always a month behind giving us the money. So,
Ms. McLean, when we get towards the end of this, he'll show you a real-world example of what he's talking about, where you'll see it's in red, and that example is where we're just waiting to get reimbursed back.
yes,
Okay,
yes,
thank you.
you're welcome. Okay, and on page 17, so again, we're projecting our ending balance to be $12.8 million. So I just wanted you to see the historical trend there of our net legal balance, and that excludes federal funding. So nothing in Fund 6 and nothing in Fund 8. So Fund 6 are all the federal funds like Title I, Special Ed, RMAC, all of those funding, homeless, McKinney-Vento, ESSER, and then Fund 8 is child nutrition, and that's all federal money. So legal, our net legal is everything beyond that. And again, we're gonna take, we're gonna transfer the 15 over to building fund, leave our net legal at 12.8, which is where we have had it for several years. And I'll just say this, if you notice back in 7, 8, and 9, you notice there was a little bit of volatility there in the net legal balance. That's back when ADE had the district in fiscal distress. And the board at that time hired Ms. Drennan, CPA, and also a consultant to come in and work on what ADE wanted to get fixed to get us out of fiscal distress. And they did that, and ADE at that time said, we recommend that your net legal balance be 12.8 million. So that's what we kept all these years. That's what ADE recommended, and that's what we strive to keep. And what they don't like to see is volatility like you see back in 07, 8, and 9. They like to see, they do understand you will have bumps in the road. You may have increases, you may have decreases, but as long as they are explained, and as long as they are expected, and as long as they don't cause a cash flow, then you're okay. But in cases where they're unexplained, that can create situations where ADE comes in and says, we need you to get this taken care of.
Mr. Brown, to your knowledge, what would have caused a major decline, if you can remember, what would cause a major decline from it to go from that particular balance all the way down to that balance from 08 to 09?
Well, it could be. I'm just totally guessing because
I know it's kind of a
because
ways
that's
back
way before my time, but I would guess that there was a loss of funding source somewhere and not a reduction in expenditures. To have a large decrease, either you had some type of building program that you were paying for out of operating that caused you to have a decrease, or you had a loss of revenue of some kind and you didn't adjust your expenditures and you had a decrease in legal balance. So
it's measures in place now to prevent that from, besides the 12 million that you have to have, that you can recognize it before it dips too far. Gotcha.
yes,
Okay.
and that again goes back to that monthly, the page before. We're constantly projecting what our ending balance will be,
Gotcha, okay.
and we do it on a monthly basis. So if there's something that we need to adjust mid-year, I wouldn't have a problem talking to the superintendent about it. But we monitor that, and as long as everything is rolling along like we expect it, then he doesn't hear from me, and, you know, we're balancing the books as we expect through, you know, each month.
Can we go back to page 16 again?
Yes, ma'am.
Because what you're saying is we're gonna have a balance of 12.8 million.
Net
Because
legal.
we're taking 15 million and putting it to the building fund so that we can keep that 12.8 that the department has said, this is what
Correct.
we would like for you to do.
Yes, ma'am.
So are we putting it at the building fund because we want to build a new middle school? Or do we just normally put it in the building fund, or?
Yes and no. So, the state has, and the state has a law that says your net legal balance cannot exceed 20% of your net legal revenues for the year. There were legislators that I guess thought schools were keeping money, hoarding money, not using it to educate kids. So, and they were seeing big balances from some school districts, and they enacted a law that says your balance cannot exceed 20% of your net legal revenues, so your net legal balance. So what they do is they calculate our net legal revenues, take 20% of it, and then they give you what your maximum balance can be. Then our maximum balance usually fluctuates depending on our revenue each year, because that changes, but usually it's around $15 to $16 million. That would be the maximum we could keep in our bank and not trigger on some kind of alarm over ADE or the legislature. But the law says if you exceed that balance, which we will this year, then you can make a transfer to your building fund for future building needs. And so that's why we're putting it there, future needs. And that could be future building needs, or it could be future operational needs. If we get 4 or 5 years down the road and our ending balance is gonna be 10 million, and we want to keep it at 12.8, instead of coming to you as the board and saying, can I move the excess over to the building fund, I would ask, can I withdraw money from the building fund to make us whole at 12.8 and keep our legal balance there? So it's there for future needs, not necessarily all for building needs. It could be but it can be for building needs or land purchases or a roof replacement. It could be for a roof replacement or an air conditioning replacement.
Right.
That building fund is
Emergency.
is for keeping the buildings in operational form.
Basically, it's like our little savings account. That's where we can put money and we
That's
can
right.
go. That's the only category where we can put money and go back and get it back.
Yes,
that's
And go back
That's
and
right.
put it back in.
That's
correct.
It can fluctuate.
So
Gotcha.
by board action, you can remove it takes board action to put it there, and it takes board action to remove it from there. So if you'll notice, some of the big ticket items, like a roof or a expensive HVAC item that is being replaced and is being presented to you, sometimes that may show up on the first 4 digits of the fund show up as 3,000. Well, the 3,000, regardless if it's under 20 or over 20, we're bringing that to you for approval just because the money is sitting in Fund 3,000, the building fund. So it takes board action to put it there, and it takes board action to remove it from there. And
No
we
matter
bring
the
those
cost,
to you.
I mean the amount, right?
Ma'am?
No matter the amount.
matter
Okay,
the amount.
gotcha, okay.
Yes. So you may see some things on the consent agenda at times that are under 20,000 that are coming out of 3,000, the building fund, but that's why it's sitting there. It's because it's coming out of there and we're getting your approval to do that as the board.
When you have to go to it to get money from it like that, is that because the place that you normally would go to get that money is short on money or low on money, and so you pull from that? Because I'm assuming that the money that we spend on HVAC or other things falls under a certain,
For normal things that happen, like HVAC service contracts, filter changes, standard operating things, we take care of out of operating. It's when something catastrophic happens and you have to replace, like,
Whole roof.
you have to replace an entire roof on a school or the bus shop, or, because it's leaking, or you have to do a roofing overlay, or we're painting a building, something that's out of the ordinary, that's not like the daily operational part of that, or daily operational upkeep, we charge that to the building fund, but we always come to the board for approval to do that. Everything else comes out of the operating budget.
I like page 16.
Okay, very good. And if we can go back to page 16 one more time, I just want to show you something. This is for future reference. Do you see above each month it says actual? Okay, so if you were to look at the sheet for this year, the only months that we have completed, truly completed, is the month of July. So the only month that would have the word actual above it would be the month of July. Everything else would say projected. You'll notice down there above period 13, the column after June, it says projected. That's because we're not final yet on period 13. That happens when we do a final close. So what you would see as we report this to you or share it with you on a monthly basis, you will see those months actually convert from a projected to an actual, and you'll be able to see that change progress. So you could look at one of these and say, well, okay, there's 3 months here that are actual and the rest of the months are projected, and you can see how that balance fluctuates based on our projections. So yeah, we'll be glad to share that with you, but that just gives you a little insight into reading that for future
Thank you.
purposes. Any questions about page 17? Okay. Page 18. That is our 3/4 average ADM. And ADM stands for Average Daily Membership. That's not how many kids are attending school on that day. That would be average daily attendance. It's how many kids are on your membership roll. So how many are enrolled in school, whether they are present or absent. Okay? That's how states fund schools on their state aid notice. It's the number of kids, it's the average number of kids for the first 3 quarters that are enrolled every day in your school. So you'll notice I've given you a long trend there. We've kept up with that, and actually Dr. Paluski, I think, has an even larger document that goes back further, maybe in his office. But the ADM trend here starts 2007, and you'll just see we've had that gradual decline of student enrollment all the way through 2020, and then in 2020 we had a huge drop. And that was experienced by a lot of schools with kids staying home and parents keeping their kids out of school due to the pandemic.
So is
But
that-
I'd like to know. Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry, is that the October report, and then it's again in the end of December or January?
So there are multiple dates and multiple student counts that generate funding for us. So I think you're referring to a December 1 child count, an October 1 child count, and then this 3/4 ADM. So there's several different counts. So the December 1 child count, I believe, is for special education funding.
Okay.
Then the October 1 child count is
That's the
for
main big
food.
one.
That's for food and nutrition and the free and reduced lunch. Then this Now, this ADM count is something that starts the first day of school. So ADE looks at how many kids are enrolled on day one in North Little Rock School District, K-12. Then they look at day two, how many are enrolled, look at day three, and they don't quit looking at that until the end of the third quarter. So all the way past Christmas, all the way past spring break,
Oh, okay.
the end of our third quarter, they stop adding them up, and then they take an average. So if there are 178 days in the school year, and roughly 3/4 of those are in your first 3/4, you know, that, you can do the math there. It's a little bit over 100 days that would be in, maybe 120, that would be in your first 3/4. So they're looking at your enrollment for 120 days and dividing by 120. And that's what they use the following year to generate your money. And that's what's called the ADM. That's what we're looking at here. So let's just look. If you'll look at the column 2020, so the one all the way to the right, the column 2022, it says 7640.32. That's the ADM. That was our ADM for last year. All 3/4 averaged together. That ADM that they calculated last year is what you're gonna see on our state aid notice that determines our funding for this year. So that number right there, that 7640.32, will be on our state aid notice, and I'll show you in just a minute where that shows
So
up.
we're paid like a year behind.
We're paid a year
Gotcha,
behind.
okay.
Yes, ma'am. So this year, you'll notice what our current K-12 ADM is. Our current K-12 is 7925. And I think with pre-K, we're at 8503.
Correct.
8503. So pre-K has its own separate funding, but K-12 only deals with the ADM.
So on the 7640, when do we get that money?
That is for this current year.
Coming.
It's based on
In-
last year's
In
enrollment.
2022.
We get it in
So,
2022,
For the
2023.
7925, we'll get that this time,
Next year.
2023.
That's
Next year.
correct.
Gotcha.
That's correct.
Gotcha. Okay.
And that number, that 7925, it's gonna fluctuate. It's gonna go up and down because it's a reoccurring daily average until you get to the end of your third quarter. And they look just simply at the number of kids that are enrolled in your school district, K-12. So as we progress throughout the year, that 7925 may go up or it may go down. And as we settle in toward spring break, that number, the average, the big average tends to fluctuate less, and we tend to know where that number's gonna land. But it is a fluctuating, that one that says current, it fluctuates until we have completed 3 9 weeks of instruction.
Mr. Brown,
Yes,
well,
ma'am.
is there still a trend where people still don't register their children until after Labor Day?
Yes, ma'am.
That's
Yes,
what
ma'am.
I'm saying.
Yes, ma'am.
For
Some-
years, and I wonder if that old, it has not broken.
It has not broken, and it still happens. There will still be children and parents show up
After Labor Day.
after Labor Day
Mm-hmm.
and to enroll.
We've
And
done a
lot-
much better job this
Yes.
year under Dr. Hooper's leadership too, because our students have to re-register every year, and we've been able to get a lot of those students prior to. But yes, that's what I keep hearing as well,
Yeah.
I wonder what
which
they-
will be.
I hope they're like moving or something versus
Back in
just-
our day, we didn't
staying
start
out.
school till after Labor Day.
We'll be out Monday, see.
2
And
weeks.
so therefore, but I'm just saying, it's been a tradition for years that parents do not register children, and like they say, summer's not open until after Labor Day.
Yes, ma'am.
It's Arkansas.
So
And we'll
that-
have a little bump after Labor Day.
So when we quote 8,100, our number,
That's the current, that's what we
That's-
call them.
that's the current
That's-
number, but that
But that includes
not-
pre-K. In what Mr. Brown is sharing, right,
Okay.
So when we say that number, that's every single child in this district. But for this funding, you gotta pull out the pre-K. Matter of fact, we just looked at that number today, so 8,503 was the number we talked about in our staff meeting today. But you'll see you've got to exclude pre-K out of that, and there you go, you get to that
Okay.
7,925. I know it's confusing, and pre-K has its own number and its own funding source.
It's just that when you say it, we say it behind you, and so when somebody asks, I'll know that's
Every single child.
every child.
Every child.
Pre-K.
Service every child in the North Little Rock School District.
Yes, ma'am.
You have explained it very well, Dr. Valesky.
Thank you.
Thank you, madam.
Now, what was the December 1st count? What does that do? What does that
December 1
determine?
child count is connected to special ed. And then there's an October 1 count that's connected to child nutrition. Then we have the ADM count that is connected to our state foundation funding.
So
There's
there's
also an ELL count. There's also an ALE FTE. There's a lot of different counts that,
And times of the year
in times of the year.
that those get captured in.
And like our ALE funding, our alternative learning environment funding, they don't stop their enrollment count at 3 quarters. They go all 178 days of student enrollment.
'Cause that's a
So
lot.
one FTE of ALE means you have spent 178 days in ALE.
True.
So, there's a lot of different student counts for different funding sources. And, ELL, a lot of these counts are current year, some of them are last year counts. ELL is a current year count, so they wait and see how many English language learners you have, and they base your budget off of that. That's usually a December 1 count that generates funding after the first of the year, so.
So average daily attendance does not determine anything.
The only thing
It does.
that determines it, funding wise, no, but academic wise, it does. There, you have to, your attendance is figured into your accountability
Yeah, that
scores
state.
with the state. So there, it does count. It's just there's not a financial impact for students that are absent. That the enrollment says how many kids are enrolled in your school, and the way they figure that is the number of kids present and the number of kids absent, and they add them together. So the ADM does not penalize you for absentees. It's the accountability models that have an attendance requirement there, where
Right, which gets factored into the overall score, letter grade.
letter grade score for your school.
So we- chronic absenteeism.
So to follow up with that, if a child is absent or marked absent in one class, say it's medicine time, does that count against us? Because the teacher doesn't realize that the child has to take medicine and it brings that child in 7 minutes to 15 minutes late in that class? Or are we talking overall, all day,
Correct.
all 4 classes
Which is-
marked absent?
Which is considered the 10% of chronic absenteeism.
Okay.
That's what gets counted. That's what we monitor with our schools, of looking at that attendance rate every single day and looking at the number of students that are past the 10%. Because that's in the school quality index of ESSA, where that gets held against the school if you're beyond that chronic absenteeism component.
And what about the kids that are suspended? Does that count against us? Like, you just opened a whole nother can of worms. We'll come back to this.
Okay.
We'll come back.
That's a whole thing, is, Dr.
I
Hooper
know,
there with
that's-
ESSA, and we could dig into that. But you're making the connection back to,
Uh-huh.
as it relates to how it gets funding, but
Please
then
make
there's
sure
another
your
side of
children are
that,
at
which is,
school. Every day.
Yeah. That's a whole nother can of worms.
Any other
Sorry.
questions about page
No.
18?
We
Nope,
stick to the
we're
money.
good.
We good, we good.
Okay, let's look at page 19. This is our state aid notice. So if you look at line 10, you'll see that number I referred to a moment ago, 7640.32. That's our last year's three-quarter ADM, and that is the number that drives the funding on this state aid notice.
Okay.
So you'll notice there, so the way this is divided, if you look in the top section between the two lines is the data section. That's where all of your assessment, your net revenues, your ADM history, all of that information that's between the lines is data. And then all the information between the second two lines is your funding. So if you'll notice on line 28, that's our state foundation funding. And the funding amount is $7,413 per child. We're getting $35.7 million state foundation funding. Educational Excellence Trust is $4 million. That comes built into the state foundation funding. ALE, we're getting $613,000 this year, and I would point out that that ALE funding is down. That normally has been in the range of $800,000 to $1 million, but it is based on the number of students that are in the program. That's called an FTE. So it's based on the number of FTEs, the students that are in the program, and the number of days they're spending out there. So I just wanted to note there that there is a reduction there in ALE funding. ALE is what we call a categorical fund, and it is a parent funding or a sister funding source to ESSA, PD, ELL, ALE. All of those are categorical fundings. And if there's a shortfall in one of the categoricals, you can do a transfer from one categorical to another. So if you need more money in PD than is granted there, you can transfer that from ELL or ESSA or ALE, however you want to do it. But the way it normally happens here is we transfer money annually from ESSA to ALE to balance that budget. We transfer money from ESSA, which is the old NSLA fund. They've changed the name on it. We transfer money from ESSA to ELL to balance the budget. We don't get enough money in ELL or ALE to run those programs. So we have to pay for the expenditures out of those funds, and they run in the negative, and we let them run in the negative all year, and then at the end, we're going to do one transfer from ESSA to bring them back to zero. We monitor that, and we make sure it's within the limits and what we expect, and we keep tabs on that. But you'll see that on your board report toward the end of the year, the funding that we receive. So this $600,000 won't last long in ALE because that program is over a $2 million program.
Okay.
So the $600,000 won't last long, and then ALE will start running in the negative. We'll let it run in the negative all year long, and then we'll do a transfer, and we'll bring that back to a zero balance. But the transfer will be from ESSA.
So that average is 1.4 of what it costs the school district to run the ALE because the revenue does not cover it that's coming in.
Well,
Or more. This year it's projected to be 1.8.
because the more students we send down here, the more money we have, don't you?
That's correct. The more students that are in the program, the more ALE funding you get. There is a cap. I was talking to Dr. Paluski about that. There is a cap on the number of kids that you can have there, but we've never reached the cap before. So there is room for students to go and generate funding for you. However, the more the kids that you enroll this year, you'll see the funding next year from it, because they'll use this year to calculate your FTE. The $600,000 for this year is already set because it's based on last year's student enrollment there.
How's the money spent for this program?
All salary and benefits,
Okay.
all salary and benefits. So it's spent on people for the program.
But it's a good thing that our numbers are down from ALE. That means we're reaching these children in other areas, and we're able to take care of them better within the schools instead of sending them to the alternative program.
Yes.
But as we also talked about, this is an area of priority for us as we need to rethink what alternative education looks like. If you looked at the curriculum audit report, nearly 90% of the students in ALE are African-American males. We've talked about this many times. Students that get in ALE, they never get out of ALE. So we're working on a proposal to bring you at some point of rethinking how to meet the needs of our most fragile children.
That is so wonderful, sir. Money isn't everything, you see, but it's good when it's being used properly. That's what I'm saying.
Yes, ma'am.
And your speech down there to that school was very nice.
Thank you, Ms.
And you
Williams.
did pinpoint that the students there are not moving academically as
That's
they
right.
should.
Yes, ma'am.
And I appreciate your insight for pointing it out to the staff that they needed to do some improvement.
Yes. You want to go on to the next page? All right.
Yes. One thing I would like to point out, the very last item on that line 47.
47.
What is
Teacher
that?
salary equalization funding. This is new funding for us, and it is forever funding for us. So we'll always get this 1.4 or more. We can never get less.
Nice.
So last year, we qualified for funding from the state to help us increase our teacher salaries. And this year, that's part of the money that's being used to fund the raises that we're paying teachers on the new salary schedule this year.
Oh,
Okay.
is that the one the governor gave us?
No, this is, the governor wanted to do some additional funding. That hasn't materialized yet, but this funding here, oh, well, yes, it was his initiative last year.
Right.
That generated this funding. Yes,
Okay,
ma'am.
but it's not talking about this.
Not the
$1.3
current discussion.
million dollars they got,
So,
okay.
That's, yes, ma'am.
That's coming.
That's
Okay,
the-
thank you. I hope
It's
so.
on the way.
Okay, and then the page 20 just gives you, that graph is in millions of dollars. You can see the trend was generally up until the pandemic, and then we lost kids. That's tied to ADM, and that actually reduced down in 21 and 22, because that was based on 20 and 21 ADM numbers. But you can see we're back on the rise, so that will increase with our student enrollment. Page 21. Then we referenced earlier the refinancing of bonds, and I wanted to go over with you our bonded debt savings outlook. And so I told you in fiscal year 22, we had $9 million that was attributed to, it was 9.25 million attributed to the refinancing of bonds. In fiscal year 23, we will have 7.5 million. In 24, 7.5. In 25, 7.5, and then you'll notice it starts declining, okay? So you'll notice here that it declines in 26 and then to 27, but then it stays steady through fiscal year 31. These are the savings that we're taking from the bond refinance, and we're taking those all up front. So I wanted you to see that we will have an elevated, we'll expect an elevated balance in the next few years, but all that's going to the building fund, and then we'll pull that out as needed, okay? And that is, so these large sums of money, the 9 million and the 7 million, are all one-time money. So obviously you can't tie, some people might say, why don't you just tie that to the salary schedule? Well, it's one-time money. It's not for the life of the loan or the mortgage on our schools. So that goes over, and those are for one-time uses, whether it's a bonus or building a building or replacing an HVAC or whatever, replacing a roof, whatever your needs are, those are for one-time uses over in the building fund. Okay? I also want to point out this. The superintendent told you that we would come to you with how we're going to fund the safety and security restructure that you all done and that you all approved. It was a priority for this district and this board, and you all approved that, and you said, find the funding source. Here's our funding source. We're gonna take that $700,000 cost for the safety and security revamp, and we're gonna pull it out of this bond structure, and you'll notice we're good all the way through 31. So you have your funding source for safety and security in stone all the way through fiscal year 31. By that time, Dr. Paluski will have increased our student enrollment.
Yes, we will,
We
as a
will
whole
have-
team.
We will have increased our student enrollment, our state funding will be up, and we won't need that source, but it is there if we need it. So 700,000 will earmark for all the way through 31 to pay for our safety and security upgrade. We told you that we would bring you that source of funding, and that's where we'll pay for that.
How
You wanna
much
say
debt
anything
do
else
we
about-
have right now?
Ma'am,
How much debt do we have?
we have,
We haven't got to that yet.
We have not there
We
yet.
haven't got there yet.
we have 169 million on one bond, and we have 18.8 million on another bond. That's the debt that we have.
Could we also include that, Mr. Brown, in our Q&A,
Yes.
just so that all the board members would have that?
Yes. Those are our two bond issues, and I think there were 4 bond issues, and we refinanced 3 of them together. So that first large one actually had 3 bond issues that were put together, and then the last one had not reached maturity. We couldn't refinance it. We had to wait, or it would have been included in the first one. But it had to be 5 years old, and it didn't reach 5 years old until December of 21, and the board refinanced it as soon as it met that eligibility. So you add those 2 numbers, that's our bonded debt. I've also got page 22, just a reminder that our teacher administrator salary schedule, of course, all salary schedules had increases to them, but the one districts tend to get measured by is the teacher and administrator schedule. So I put this in here just for your reference and the public's reference that our beginning teacher salary is $37,750. I would like to say I do anticipate working with LPPC and Dr. Paluski and bringing you all a proposal to increase that further this year. We'll monitor that spreadsheet that I'm going to share with you all on a monthly basis. That's what I'm doing. I'm monitoring that. So that's for our use in the office. But I'm anticipating we've had an increase in assessment, tax assessment, that will generate additional tax dollars. We've had increase in student enrollment that will generate additional dollars. And we also have, there's a third thing, it's escaped my mind. There are 3 things that give me encourage me on being able to do. And I hear our neighboring districts doing more for their teachers. And I know that we want to be competitive. We want to do all we can do for our teachers. So I anticipate being able to bring you something further in the spring that would be effective for next year.
Right.
So you all just look forward to that. I'll work with LPPC and Dr. Paluski, and we'll get a proposal together. But I intend to work on that. I'll run numbers this fall on what those potential increases could be, but I would like to bring it to you in January or February after we've got 6 months under our belt, and I see tax revenue is gonna settle in where we thought it would, and our ADM doesn't take a dive. You know, I'm being optimistic. I know it's gonna increase, but from the finance side, you always have to be looking for what ifs. And so
Hopefully
I
by
want,
then, we would have heard from the governor on that extra money.
that's right.
Mr.
That's
Brown,
because of the November, the legislative piece, yeah.
that was the same, you all said you all was gonna take questions from the board to have them, for you all to work on. That would have been my question to you all. What could you bring us like in 23, 24, to make salaries compatible, not only to teachers, but all of our employees in
Yes,
this district?
Yes.
And
Yes,
that
ma'am.
would give us, I know we can't do it, but for you all foreseeing, since I just heard you tell about the 3 things, you missed one, but I did hear the 2,
Yes.
that you see some light at the end of the tunnel.
Yes.
And so, therefore, we would be receiving something from you as a recommendation. How could we implement something for that 23, 24 year
Yes.
for all employees,
So,
compatible,
what I-
compatible
and the-
services, because that's when everybody can get a bus, and we can't get one, no bus drivers, everybody else pulling them because they paying more.
That's correct. So, yes, good point. So whenever I mention salary increases, I'm talking about across the board.
Right.
So we'll bring a plan for you for that. The third thing that I couldn't think of a moment ago was, Dr. Paluski, when he came, he brought the idea of position control. And we meet faithfully every week, and we review every position that's open. And we decide, is that needed? Can it be absorbed? And that has been good for the district. We have absorbed positions that weren't needed, so we didn't replace them along the way. So we've had what I feel like is good attrition. We've had attention to it. We've also had the increase in tax revenue and increase in our student enrollment. I think the more that we can look and absorb as positions come open, you know, the more we can absorb and become more lean as a system, the more we can invest in our salary schedules. So, you know, I plan on looking at that data as well, you know, just comparing us to other districts, you know, how lean are we or how not lean are we?
Okay.
So, anyway, I've got this salary schedule in here just for your reference. It's in that document, and for the public, that tends to be how we're measured.
Mr. Brown, when you come back to us, would you tell us how much you trimmed and how much we gained as an asset? That was gonna be my other question that I had written down, to knowing, what has been our revenue income. Dr. Paluski had mentioned this about 5 or 6 months ago, that he was going to look into the excess of staff that didn't need to be working. You know, schools were overloaded with employees, but the students weren't there. And thank you for a job well done, sir.
Thank you, Ms. Williams.
So if you go back to that, your favorite page 16,
Okay,
and down at the bottom,
Okay.
where I've got the 15.075 million total, that last line that says additional operational savings, the 1.512,
okay,
that is the amount that is attributed to attrition, where we've had positions open that we haven't filled, and we're able to quantify that there. That's money
Okay.
that we didn't spend, that we consider operational savings. So
And
Dr.
these were
Paluski-
already vacant positions.
These were
Let's
vacant
make
positions.
that,
Yes, we're
like,
not-
these were already vacant
As,
positions.
as the positions come open, we
Right.
say, have things changed? Do we still
Gotcha.
need it? If we need it, we advertise it and it's filled. You all fill and hire. If we decide we don't need it and it can be absorbed, we just don't advertise the position and you all never hire that position. So it's absorbed. So,
That's a good
yeah.
thought. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
I love seeing that specified in that little list of yours. That is great. I'm glad you point that out to
Yes,
us.
ma'am.
And I also want to say, I do remember indirect costs from when Macy and I had our grant. Once upon a time, I didn't know what indirect costs were. I think I kind of remember now. But,
Well, that's a question I receive annually.
Yeah.
From the board. And I'm sure people in the public need to know that. So indirect costs for anything that's charged directly to the grant is called a direct cost. So the purchase orders that you all did to buy the Nooks, that was a direct cost. It's charged directly to it. If you bought cases for them, that was charged to the grant, that's a direct cost. An indirect cost is something that there's a cost to doing, but it's not charged directly to that grant. So if you were required to be a school district with a superintendent to apply for the grant, then, just having to have the superintendent is a cost that's indirect to that grant. If the accounts payable department writing a check for you to spend your grant, that's an indirect cost. I didn't bill one of my account payable salaries to you. I just said that's an indirect cost. And then the state comes in and says, here's your allowable indirect cost rate. And they set a percent. So they say, here's the percentage that you can take of all the federal funds that allow it if funding is available, if the fund will allow it, if there's sufficient balance. So an indirect cost is just an expense for a related service that wasn't directly billed to the grant in itself. So,
Since Ms. Edwards taking the notes, my other question, I don't know if we'll come to it, would you all include in your budget of how we will finance the improvement of Old Main and looking at having a new school, a new junior high school? Could you show us something like that in the budget?
I don't
Yes.
think- Do we have all that, how much it's gonna cost us yet to be able to do that?
Yeah.
We don't.
we can
What-
outline our
in the
plan.
budget, it's gonna have to be discussed,
Yes.
because this is something they said,
We have-
possibility.
Dr. Paluski and I discussed that today. We have preliminary numbers that we think we'll have to set aside in our building fund
Okay,
for a new middle school, but we won't know the exact amount that we'll have to set aside until the spring, when the state reviews our application for matching grants.
I was just saying, when you all get to that point,
Yes,
Yeah.
just be able to show the board
sure.
something where we're trying to go
Yes,
and
ma'am.
what you are doing financially, because it is something visionary that we do want to happen. And I know that we're gonna have to do something for our Old Main, and then we're looking at the middle school, having a middle school for our 7th and 8th grade and 6th grade children.
So let me tell you what we can do. And so right now, our building fund is all kept in Fund 3000.
Okay,
As we finalize our application with the state and they give us funding, they tell us the funding amount, we get architect drawings, we know what that's gonna look like, we get the price tag, we get those price tags out. As we earmark money, I can take out of that 3,000, I can create like a 3,001, a 3,002,
Yeah, A,
a
B, C,
3,003.
Priorities.
I can create a 3001 and call it middle school. We can move money out of that 3,000 down to the 3001 line.
right.
Then we can say, Old Main, 3002. You can earmark money, I'll move it down to 3002. And that way, every month that I run those board reports, that earmarked money will show up in those earmarked accounts. So we can, and then we would draw from those to pay bills for an old main renovation or a new middle school addition or new structure. And we could still draw the 3,000 for replacing a roof or HVAC or anything that we need to do out of the original building fund. So we can create that. We can, as our plans develop as a board and as a district, we can earmark that for you. That's not a problem, and it can be visual on there so people can keep up with that.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. All right, page 23 is salary and benefits, and I've given you historically there. You'll notice that this year we're projecting 82.84 million to be used for salary and benefits.
And that's gone up mostly because of the increases in pay, not because of increase in personnel, right?
That's correct.
And benefits too have.
Well, that's also scheduling, that's also scheduling in the $3,000 retention bonus that we're planning to pay out of ESSER funds for the next 2 years. So that's, that little bit of inflation there is also including, it's the salary increase, but it's also the additional, it's also the retention bonus that'll be paid out of ESSER as well. Okay, now the proposed revenue, you'll notice here we got it, usually funds 10,000 and 20,000 are considered state and local. I'm sorry, 1,000 and 20,000, 10,000 and 20,000 are considered local sources, and then 3,000 is your state source. So if you'll notice, 41 million is our local, that's tax base, and then the state comes in with the 47 million, and then we have 25 million we're projected for this year, and then 400,000, Ms. McLean, that's indirect costs on all of our grants.
I knew that.
Yes.
I was looking at
So
that,
that
so
other
that's gotta
source-
be indirect cost.
So that is the indirect cost line. So, I didn't do the percentages on those, but can you do
We can put that in the Q&A.
Q&A? I'll break that down into percentages for you on what percent is local, state, and federal.
Right.
Okay, now I do want to say, so you see that link there that says FY23 detailed revenue list? So that, what I gave you is a summary of this,
Okay.
okay? So I would be happy to let you review this, and if you have questions, you can ask me. I just want you to see that, like the 10,000 number on the first, on this summary page, so the 10,000 here are all of the numbers that begin with 1 on this page, okay? So the 20,000 are all the numbers that begin with 2 on the second page, and so forth. All the 30,000 are the ones that begin with 3. And they are all tied to local, state, and federal funding sources. I would like to just kind of walk you through how this is set up. So if you'll notice, you have fiscal year 19. So the green, the dark green column is your actual revenue for fiscal year 19. Fiscal year 20 is your actual revenue, 21. And then in 22, you've got a fiscal year budget and a fiscal year year-to-date, fiscal 22 year-to-date. And then you have a variance in the budget for year-to-date. And you'll notice that some of those are in red. And for revenue, that means, if it's in red, that means we scheduled revenue and didn't quite meet that. Or it means we're waiting on revenue. Remember, we haven't closed 22 yet. We're waiting on revenue that we've spent currently in this year. So some of these negatives are, and I'll just point out, like let's look on the fourth page, I believe. And you'll see the 45995, the line that says 45995, ARP ESSER. And you see that negative? Negative 900,000. Well, if you recall, there was an issue with a legislative council where they wanted school districts to start looking at giving retention bonuses out of ESSER funds and not out of the state revenue. And the governor wanted to do it out of state, the legislature wanted to do it out of ESSER funds. And they paused, they rescinded, if you all remember, they rescinded an authorization to ADE for ESSER funding until schools could bring a plan to do retention bonuses. North Little Rock had already done that. Our plan to do retention bonuses was already there and submitted. We were ahead of the game, and we were giving more than what they wanted us to give. But when they rescinded authorization for ADE to get ESSER funds to distribute to the schools, that caused us to have to carry those expenses that we made for a month longer, because they only do these reimbursements once a month. So we're still waiting on that money to come in, but that's why you see a large negative there. And that's what Dr. Paluski was referring to a moment ago. When we are waiting, when we're waiting on that money, it's called an accrual. So I'll be glad to answer any questions you have about how this, and the yellow column is, of course, the budget for this year. So that yellow column totals up to the summary page that's over here in the original budget book. So I'm not going to go through this line by line with you. I want to go over how it was made up. We've been over this type of worksheet before, but I'll go as in depth as you want me to.
No.
Okay.
I could leave.
But I'll also allow you to review it, and if you have questions, ask me questions. Either call me or email me or bring them to a board meeting or email them to Dr. Paluski, and we'll answer them and get them in our Q&A document that we plan to share.
I would just request, if you have a question, please just email Mr. Brown directly and just copy me.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because that way, if you have a question, then we want to get it on the Q&A sheet. So that if you're asking a question, more than likely maybe another board, we want to make sure that we answer all your questions, but you get to see the other questions that are being asked.
That's good.
So you can see we're projecting 114 million in revenue.
Can I interrupt on that revenue? Just how much of this money comes with strings attached? Like you just said, they were, well, I mean,
I'm following.
if you can have this money and we're counting it, but it has to be spent this way, or you have to do this, or how much of this,
The hokey pokey money.
we're gonna give you this money if,
Most of the category 4,
Yeah.
the 25 million, is restricted, most of that. Some, like categorical funding in state and local, that's about 7 million. That's restricted. So I would say, to answer your question, probably a little over 30 million is restricted.
Right.
The other is unrestricted, however, it's tied to salary and benefits, which are not optional. You have people that you're paying and you're providing benefits for. And that's 80% of our overall budget that we're doing that with. So, you also have a debt payment that you really don't have a choice, you gotta pay it. So, when everything settles, when you pay what you have to pay, when you spend what's restricted on what's restricted, I would say less than 10% of your budget is discretionary and not earmarked. And that's where schools get their pot of money where they can go buy things for themselves. Buy things to operate their school.
Let me ask you a question, and this was just something I just thought about, Jacob, you might have to answer this too, but as far as when you were talking about salary and benefits, have you noticed a trend as far as benefits, that particular cost going up?
Yes, and that's a good question.
Insurance.
Very good question. So, yes, there are multiple things going up this coming year, and that's another reason the salary and benefits was a little bit higher. If Arkansas teacher retirement, the contribution rate for an employee and the contribution rate for the employer is going up this year to 7% and 15% respectively. So about 5 years ago, there was a move for districts to outsource things. And teacher retirement saw this money exiting the payroll of school districts and going to outsourced. And they were seeing a reduction in revenue. So they went to the legislature, and the legislature approved a 1% increase, both on the employee contribution side and the employer contribution side, from 14 to 15%. And the law specified it would be increased in a 0.25% increment over 4 years. Last year we were at 14.75. This year we go to the 15%. So this is the last year of that increase. It will that is a benefit that is increasing. Also, we have there's a new law that went into effect where we have to contribute a minimum of $300 for a teacher. We have to contribute $300 per month to insurance for employees. They're passing along a part of that cost through the foundation funding formula. We're waiting on EBD. There's been some confusion with the communication that EBD has put out in the public regarding this increase. So as soon as we get our total numbers, Ms. Edwards and I did our best guess, because we have to have our budget done to be approved by you and be submitted to the, so we've done our best guess on what we interpret that to be. And I think we've interpreted it, you know, in our favor on that. So I don't think we have any choice of missing it on budget-wise. But as soon as I get concrete clarification from them, I will bring action to you, because that will change the amount that we contribute to employee insurance beginning January 1 of 2023. So as of right now, the contribution remains the same, what we've always been paying, the $274, $268, something, some cents.
Mr. Brown,
79.
I want to commend you on this report, and we didn't have to go before the legislatures. That is also very good. But I do remember in 2009, we had to go before the legislators because they couldn't balance the books, okay? So, but I want to compliment you and your department on that.
Thank you.
Another thing, how much money did you all save when you cut the poor retirement teachers' insurance out?
I don't.
The poor retired teachers.
I don't recall that. I remember that. I don't recall the amount that it cost, but
Weren't you the head?
I did. Yes, I was.
Uh-oh.
No, I wasn't the head. No, I wasn't the one in charge at that time.
See,
I
Miss
was the
Valerie-
one driving that
Miss Valerie
spreadsheet.
and I are both sitting here, and all we had to pay was those little pennies, and you all cut, Dr. Paluska, they cut us out. And that little insurance money we could get to help bury ourselves, they took it. And it was so minimal. This is what I'm saying. So, just a thought for retirement, Dr. Paluska, in the future, whatever you find with the board, since you're here, you're so visionary. And maybe you could come up with
The
something.
poor retired teachers need
That's
assistance.
why we could come back and,
Help everyone.
hey, if you would
Want your
give them
burial
something, maybe they'll
insurance.
come back and do a little volunteer and sign up for jobs. And Dr. Paluska wouldn't have to, Dr. Hooper wouldn't have to work so hard.
She's got some of our retired teachers. She's got them set up. Yes, ma'am.
But excuse me though for a minute, I'm just gonna ask Val, Val, what was it that we were really paying for? Some insurance? What was it?
I don't remember,
You don't?
no.
Oh, this
It was
stopped
a-
before you retired. Okay, that's
It
what
was a life insurance policy.
That's.
It was-
That's what she
I
said
know
for her to
you
bear
know
it.
It was a
See
life
that?
insurance
I
policy.
told you some burial
Yeah.
insurance.
Before I retired.
I knew you do.
I do know what you're talking about, yes.
Okay, but anyway, just.
But for the record, I was not in charge.
She need her money back. She need her policy back, just what she's saying.
Thank you, I've enjoyed this.
Yeah,
I
it
have
was
too.
real detailed.
And the last page follows the same format as the revenue. We have 111 million projected in expenditures. And then again, you have a corresponding expenditure document that follows the same format. So,
I just have one question. I think
Yes.
you told me this before, but I'm still having a hard time wrapping my head around it. When you talk about changing the budget, which I understand, changing pockets, but when we set a budget in September, let's just say we budget that, you know, we're gonna spend $2 million. And we change it through the year, can we change it, so now we're gonna spend 2,100,000, or are we're not,
You-
we turn it into a state and we're saying this is all we're gonna spend?
So the budget is a fluid document. You all are required to do the initial approval of the budget by ADE. Right now, we're budgeting the money that we know we're getting. But let's say that, Dr. Hooper decides to write a grant and get a $400,000 grant that will come in sometime this year, and we don't know about it right now, and it's not available. But we're allowed to adjust our budget and to add that in. So the initial approval by the board is required by ADE, but subsequent adjustments to that are allowed. And so actually the budget fluctuates on a weekly basis
Yeah,
as
that
we, yes.
Just can't wrap my mind around that.
One last question, Dr. Paluski and Mr. Brown and Ms. Edwards. I know I'm just talking above things, that there was no internal things going on in your office, is it? As far as issues?
No, ma'am.
Okay, that's all I want to know. So that you all can continue to work harmoniously to bring us a budget.
Yes,
You
ma'am.
know, we'd heard the report that the people had given, you know, the Gibsons. That's why I was saying, is everything working well in your department?
I would like to commend my department. They are a well-oiled machine. They know their jobs, they do their jobs.
I've heard that
It's
before.
about time.
They know it, and they do it. And I'm telling you,
Somebody bring her chocolate. She's
I'm-
nicer when she eats chocolate.
You know what? Let's make sure this is actual.
and you know me, I'm gonna give praise where praise is due. I want to, in front of you all, say, Miss Edwards is a jewel. And I thank her.
Amen.
I thank her on a almost daily basis. I think I actually asked you this morning.
Okay,
Have I
Delta,
told you lately?
got
Thank you for
your
choosing North Little Rock. Okay.
Delta. Okay, I wanna ask you something. Being honest, that's why I was being honest. If everything is going well, I do remember you said that Mr. Edwards she had told me she had taken, before Dr. Bruce had come over, taken over responsibilities to make sure that people would quit complaining, and I do wanna commend you for that.
Yes.
And so, she is a good handmaid.
And I'm telling you, everyone in my department, they know their job and they do it. And you all, I'm
You got
talking
Dr.
about,
Paluski
we've
down
got-
pat.
we've got,
Know your job, do your job.
you all have your bank rec every month. It is balanced to the penny, and if there's a penny out of place, we know where it is. Out of a $100 million budget, if you get something, you also get a memo that tells you why that
'Cause you're
variance
going
is
to
there
jail.
and when it will please. So,
I have two quick questions.
Yes.
One,
I'm-
you talked about the website, the book, being able to find, is Is it gonna be on the website or you
We-
email it to us?
We will, we're actually going to put it in two places. Once you approve the budget, but it'll go into board docs. Ms. Colquitt will upload it tonight, that it's been presented to you. We'll also, by Thursday, the Q&A document, we'll make that public as well, so the public knows what your questions are and answers to those.
And the other one, since we're talking about finance, my concern is, because I talked to you about it before, those checks that are being written out of state, how much trouble is it? If it was my account, I could just go to the bank and then they just open up another account and close that one out so it can stop.
Unfortunately, so we've had that conversation with our bank. We've had that conversation about closing an account and opening a new one.
Yes.
However, due to the size of our entity
that's
and
not
the number
their-
of checks
that's
that
not
we
their-
process,
Yeah, it's
our,
not their fault.
our account stuff is always out there. So the bank said the safest thing that we can do is participate in positive pay. And positive pay is where every day that we write checks, we upload a file to the bank, and it gives the date, the check number, the vendor name, the amount, and they have it sitting there so that when a check comes through, they check the file. Of course, this is an automatic
That's how they
process.
do it. Okay.
Here comes checks. They're checking the file. Are they in there? Are they approved? If they're not, it comes out, and it comes to us for approval every morning. And so all of the discrepancies, or the exceptions that we call them, come to us every morning. We have positive pay. I think it is a lot of trouble to shut down an account, because we can't completely shut down due to the volume. And we're still trying to shut down the Bank OZK. We still have outstanding checks on that account.
Wow.
And that's been over 2 years ago.
Yeah, that was,
Wow.
that was
So,
the same thing I
it's-
had to have
Wow.
our business.
It is a monumental task to change your banks, but the safest thing we could do is to have positive pay. We tell them what checks we're writing, give them the data, they check it, they check for exceptions, and we turn it back. We're not out money, the bank's not out money, the bank that accepted it is out money if they've given something to them, so.
Makes sense. Thank you.
So you write some paychecks that people actually go cash, and then some are on direct
We-
deposit, or is everybody on direct deposit?
Everybody's on direct deposit.
Everybody's on direct deposit now. There have been occasions where we've had to write a paper check. And of course, there are, on our accounts payable account, there are people who accept ACH payments, and then there are some vendors that want a paper check. And so the paper check in the US mail is generally where
Something can happen.
something happens and it gets scanned or opened and,
Shoot up.
mhm, yes.
Yeah, well, once that information
But
on that
we are
check goes
moving,
out.
all of our employees get paid by direct deposit.
deposit.
And we're moving more and more of our vendors on the accounts payable side to ACH payments. So
Awesome.
we're writing less and less checks. So
Awesome.
we do have procedures in place to help guard for that.
Awesome.
That was very good, Dr. Brown.
Thank you.
So,
Miss Edwards, can we go now?
I do. I just publicly want to recognize Mr. Brown for his leadership and Ms. Edwards and the entire department for all the hard work that you've put into this and the transparency and to our board. So just thank you.
I didn't know what to expect tonight, actually, and this is awesome. Thank y'all very much.
Thank
Show
you.
out.
thank you.
Show up. That was good.
We were off, I have to